So I just sent him a text message back saying, what if we make Trese, our lead character, a woman? And Kajo said, oh, that would be even cooler. And yeah, within the day, Kajo sent me a sketch. I don't even think I sent him a description. I just, he just knew that it was going to be, she needed to be like a kick-ass, investigator, monster, hunter, fighter woman. And Kajo sent this sketch, and the moment I saw it, I said, okay, yeah, that's it. That's her. That's our character.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Comics Cube on YouTube. If you are a regular visitor to the Comics Cube, welcome. And if you're not, come check us out at www.comicscube.com. I'm joined by Budjette Tan, writer of the award-winning Filipino comic Trese. And Trese is, of course, done in collaboration with your artist, Kajo Baldissimo. This is the tagline that you've used for Trese since 2005. When the sun sets in the city of Manila, don't you dare make a wrong turn and end up in a dimly lit side of the metro where aswang run the most wanted kidnapping rings, where capre are the kingpins of crime, and encantos slip through the cracks and steal your most precious possessions. When crime takes a turn for the weird, the police call Alexandra Trese. So hi, Budge. Welcome to the video pod.
Hello. Hi, Doi. Yes, so after many years of using your crappy recording device, we are now on video.
That's true. I have interviewed you 3 times in the past 10 years, and before I was using a very crappy recording device instead of my phone.
Which has served you well.
Which it did, and now I don't know where it is, actually. So this is actually the 4th time. This is actually the 3rd time I'm interviewing you for Trese, because the 2nd time was when we talked about Man of Steel.
Yes.
I've never interviewed anyone else even twice, so it only seemed right to kick off this YouTube channel with you. So you used to be an ad man for one of the top creative agencies in Manila, and now you work for Lego as a creative director. So I'm sure you're used to giving elevator pitches. For the benefit of our international and even some of our local audience who may have never even heard of Trese, what is your elevator pitch?
Yeah. I am certain I'm gonna screw this up. It seems like I'm really good at it, except for Trese. I realized every time people ask me this question, I ramble for 15 minutes. But I will try my best.
In a socially distanced elevator, that might take 15 minutes to get to the floor. So.
Yes. And there'll just be 4 of you in the elevator, so it'll be fine.
That's true. Only 3 people will be listening.
Yeah. Or not, or they're just looking at how long will it take to get the elevator to go down and open. So yes, elevator pitch of Trese. Trese is a paranormal police procedural occult detective story. I'm just using buzzwords right now. So Trese is a comic book that I've made and been creating with Kajo Baldissimo since 2005, and its main character is Alexandra Trese. Her family has been involved with supernatural creatures and gods and monsters that are based on Philippine mythology, and so therefore, since they are connected to that supernatural underworld, every time a mysterious crime happens, which more often than not is because of an aswang or a tikbalang or a tiyanak, the police call them. So yes, it is. It has been my big tribute to CSI mashed up with John Constantine, with X-Files, and with Batman, I guess is the simple way of saying it.
Along with a very healthy dose of Filipino mythology.
With a lot of, yes, into the mix, yes.
So you've told me this story before, but can you tell our audience what led to the creation of Trese? If I remember right, it started out as a pitch for The Shroud. Or there something else before that? Marvel's The Shroud.
So let me talk a bit about that. So after Marvel Knights came out, I thought, wow, this would be a great time to pitch something new and daring and bold for Marvel.
It was around 2000, 2002?
Was it? Yes, I guess
It's
so.
Marvel Knights, yeah.
Yeah, Marvel Knights. So, and because yeah, if you remember the Daredevil story, there also had like a, at least it started out having a supernatural slant to it before eventually revealing that it wasn't, right. But yeah, point being is that I'm a big fan of I grew up reading the official handbook to the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
So instead of studying my textbooks in in grade school, that's what I would read in the afternoons, trying to memorize all the characters. And I love the Shroud, and that he had a team called the Night Shift. Um, so I thought of rebooting him in the same way Marvel Knights rebooted, Daredevil and all of those other characters at that time. And again, because of the love of X-Files, I wanted him to investigate supernatural crime. I think for some weird reason, I think we sent that submission twice, and got rejected twice. So somewhere in my basement are like all of my Marvel rejection letters.
You were
Uh,
young. It's okay.
yeah, yeah. I was just happy to get the rejection letter with the Spider-Man letterhead. You know,
It's the one where he's crawling towards you. Is
I
that it?
think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. So so I was just happy to get that, even though it was a rejection letter. So connected to that in a way, if you look at that pitch, the idea of somebody investigating supernatural crime, and he had his henchmen. He had his sidekicks as well. The brothers Grimm, if you remember. So they are twins, and they wear skull masks, and they use magic tricks to do their crime. I made the brothers Grimm the sidekick of the Shroud, and essentially his heavy hitters. So that was like the setup of the comic book. But the origins of it kind of backtracks to a project or a job that I worked on back in 1994. I was working with Mark Gatella, a good friend of mine from grade school, and we had been asked to write a radio show
Mhm.
about ghost stories. And instead of just, uh, uh, what do you call this? Essentially, it was like a podcast when there was no, before podcast, there was a thing called radio, kids. Yeah, yeah. You like had this little device, you switched it on, and your voices came out of the box. Um,
I
so we
love
were
that your
actually,
radio is the knob
yeah,
radio.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Obviously,
All these kids
uh,
won't know what we're talking about.
I have no idea. Yeah. So we came up with that show, and Mark was the one who came up with. He said, "Oh, let's have a narrator." Greatly inspired by what do you call this? Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone,
Oh,
who would
okay.
always introduce and end the show with an epilogue of sorts. And he was the one who said, "Okay, the name of our narrator is Anton Trese." But everything in the middle was a ghost story that had an urban setting. So it was also our take on, it was me and Mark trying to do our version of Stephen King stories. That instead of happening in a little town, it was happening in Metro Manila. But eventually, that we don't even know if that show rated at all. But that name stuck, with me, and I thought it was such a really cool name. So that years later, when I tried to start my own comic book, I asked Mark, can I use Anton Trese? And he said yes. And when I pitched it to Kadjo, um, and the reason why it came up was because in 2005, Kadjo sent me a text message. He said, "Hey, Budge, let's do a monthly comic book." And I said, because we worked in an ad agency at the time, I said, "No way are we going to do a monthly comic book." Working in an ad agency entails a lot of overtime, a lot of late nights. Your weekends are lost attending shoots or preparing for pitches. So I thought we could never possibly do a monthly comic book. But Kajo was the one who said, if you can give me a script a month, I will finish your 20-page script. I will finish it in 20 days, was his promise. And so I dug up that old script, which had Anton Trese in it, and I sent it to him. And in an hour's time, he did a quick sketch and a page of Anton Trese fighting an aswang. And then I thought, wow, this is really cool. But there was something really, it just felt too familiar or too typical to have your tough guy fighting monsters, right? Obviously, greatly inspired by Hellboy and by Batman and Constantine.
Yeah.
So I just sent him a text message back saying, what if we make Trese, our lead character, a woman? And Kajo said, oh, that would be even cooler. And yeah, within the day, Kajo sent me a sketch. I don't even think I sent him a description. I just, he just knew that it was going to be, she needed to be like a kick-ass, investigator, monster hunter, fighter woman. And Kajo sent this sketch, and the moment I saw it, I said, okay, yeah, that's it. That's her. That's our character. And true enough, true to his word, I sent him a script, and he finished it in 20 days. He drew each page during lunch break. So he would have a sandwich in one hand, and he would draw with the other hand. And that's why all of those pages look like that during the first year of Trese. We released it, photocopied ashcan versions of it, sold it for less than $1, printed 30 copies because we didn't think anyone would really buy it at the time. We also didn't want to lose money because previously, before Trese, we had spent thousands of pesos printing our own comic books, which didn't sell so much. And we delivered 30 copies at our good old friends Comic Quest branch in Mega Mall.
Oh, that's still around.
Yeah, absolutely. And 1 week later, we get a call saying, "Sir, your copies of Trese have sold out. Can you deliver more?"
Oh, wow.
So I thought, okay, I'll just photocopy 30 more. And we just kept getting calls every weekend. They would run out of copies, and that just really super encouraged us to, okay, I guess we can do this monthly thing, right? And it really just, whenever we'd sell it, it just paid enough to print the next batch. we are horrible businessmen, but
it's like that fairy tale, the shoemaker and the elves, right? Where the elves. Yes. And the shoemaker just sells it for enough to make one more shoe.
But fairy tales, yeah, not the best source of business lessons and business models, no. But then in 2007, we had enough stories to compile into a book, and we pitched it to Vizprint. Mm-hmm. Vizprint, of course, is one of the really big independent publishers here in the Philippines, that because of them, they published 2 other comic books, namely Carlo Vergara's Jaja Zaturna, as well as Manix Abrera's Kiko Machine. And seeing that they were the type of publisher that was willing to invest and publish such stories, that gave me enough courage to try and say, do you want to publish our little horror story here? And they said yes. And we've been with them all these years. And still going.
So that is very cool. And if you mentioned the other 2 comics, it shows that Vizprint really has a variety of genres, no? And that's interesting that you talked about that, because there is a school of thought, and by a school of thought, I mean I read an Alan Moore interview, that creativity is really just the act of taking something that already exists and then changing the parameters with it. So in this case, you kind of took the shroud and then you kind of localized it a little bit, your shroud pitch, and you localized it a little bit. And then you took that and then you made the main character into a woman. Would you say that's when it clicked for you?
Yeah, it just felt like it would have, I would have ended. I mean, obviously, a lot of my stories, and even like, I guess, the way Trese speaks, maybe at the beginning, I is, me wanting to do a Batman story. If you think about it, if you take a look at it from that lens, so I guess I thought that it felt too typical, especially when I first saw the first sketch from Kajo. And I guess it was also something that was pretty rare as far as like, Philippine, as far as the action genre is concerned. At least even back in the 80s and the 90s, it was typically, you had your typical action star. Pretty rarely did you see a female lead. Of course, comics wise, we do have strong female characters like Darna.
Yeah.
So maybe, I guess, in the back of my head, that was one of the things that fed into thinking, maybe our main character should be a woman. And yes, that just felt more interesting to explore, suddenly, the supernatural world with a female character, and more specifically someone who was always getting compared to her father, and how her father ran things. So that was, I guess, one of those stories that was just bubbling underneath the storylines as she kept investigating, because people would, especially in the first book, you'll notice a lot of people who encountered her kept comparing her or thinking she was going to be like her dad. And in a way, she was proving that she wasn't that she's not under her father's shadow.
Yeah, she's a completely different character, and it's interesting that you mentioned Batman because we have pre-existing characters that kind of resemble um, American superheroes, but we didn't really have a Batman figure. You've
Wow.
basically created the local equivalent of, like, if you put them all in a lineup and you said one of them has to
Wow.
be the Batman, you have basically probably created that version. And part of that is also because it is a crime comic. You said horror, but it is also a crime comic. It's a real genre blend. And I feel like me and other interviewers, and also like a lot of people in the Trese group on Facebook, focus more on the fantasy aspect of it. I don't think we ever really talk about the crime stuff. But your favorite superhero is a crime genre character. So how much of that feeds into it?
um, a lot. I mean, it's aside from Batman, of course, and of course, my favorite Batman stories are the one where he plays detective, more often than not. Um, and to add to that, to add to the Batman mix, I've mentioned, of course, X-Files and CSI, and in a way, when Ghost in the Shell, the Ghost in the Shell series that was coming out in 2005. Um, Obviously, I'm not the biggest fan. I don't know if that was SAC or was that second gig already.
I think it was
Uh,
standalone complex.
and yes,
Yeah.
the one appearing on AXN back then. But it was interesting for me that in those episodes, it was episodic. It was a procedural. It was exploring crime through the eyes of what happens to humanity the moment AI and cybernetic technology changes us, or does it really change us? What kind of crimes are now committed now that people have this, extension of themselves through technology? So I guess I took all of that, but then flipped it and looked at it from the lens of the supernatural. Um, and again, if you take a look at Philippine comic books and cinema, there have been a lot of heroes that have explored or were like defending us against the dark, against the supernatural creatures. You've had Pedro Penduko, at one point or another, even Darna, our version of Wonder Woman, has fought zombies and vampires. But yeah, no one. To my memory, I haven't seen anyone approach things from a crime point of view.
Mhm.
So and again, the I've been a fan of like detective stories, as a kid reading Hardy Boys, Sherlock Holmes. So I like that concept of doing the procedural, and it was CSI that took the procedural and made us look at it from a scientist's point of view. So there have been attempts to put that in Trese, the whole procedural bit. Not as heavy as what CSI has done, of course, but I thought that would make it more interesting. At least it made it interesting for me. So I guess eventually it translated that people would find it interesting on how she would get her information by bribing the right kind of nuno or
Yeah.
duende, or casting a spell. Essentially, if in CSI you have that moment where they go to the lab and they essentially just put that test tube on the that spinning thing, and then they play the techno music, and suddenly it's like, wow, that's how science is done. But for her,
Which in real life would take like hours or weeks or
it
something.
will take weeks, according to the real CSI people, right? It takes weeks to get that, and then the printer just spits out, and aha, she did it, right? That's how CSI would do it. So in effect, it is magical. Or hacking scenes. My favorite are like hacking scenes in what do you call this? Criminal Minds, right?
Hmm.
So the hacker always finds all of the answers in 2.5 seconds. So I thought that would also make things work in the Philippines, since we don't have all this high tech stuff and massive database of fingerprints and all of these. So make her use magic to decipher the clues and track down the suspects.
Yeah, my favorite one is when she takes somebody's eye, like the dead
Mm.
person's eye,
Yeah.
puts it in a glass bottle, and then it will show like the last thing that person saw. Is that based on a real, a real tradition, a real Philippine tradition, or did you just make that up?
It's based on I think, I don't know if it was a Sherlock Holmes movie that I saw, or one of those, obviously remakes. But in that movie, they were taking a picture of the eyeball of the victim, because back then they believed that when a person dies, the last image that person saw is imprinted in the eyeball. So you had the detective come in with this massive camera contraption, shoved it into the victim's eye, and they took a picture of it. And it was just one of those things that I remember, and I thought, okay, if you were to do it in a magical sense, how would you do it? And hence that whole spell about plucking out the eyeball and somehow making the image manifest. So yeah, it is taking bits and pieces from other movies and books that I've read, and just looking at it from a magical context.
But you do take old Filipino myths and monsters and put them in modernized settings. So, for example, the Nuno, which is a little dwarf thing that's supposed to be in a a lump of earth, now lives in a sewer because it's more comfortable for him that way in the big city. And you have the aswang, these big monsters who are in control of some organized crime. And we've seen manananggal henchmen, and I'm not even going to try to explain what a manananggal is to our international audience. You guys will have to see it. Do you think too hard about what twists and turns you're going to put those guys through, or does it just kind of come to you?
A little bit of both. I mean, um, as I write the stories, I'm trying to figure out who does she go up against this time, or she needs to find out a piece of information about, for example, fire elementals or something like that. So then that's when I backtrack, and figure out, okay, maybe I would get this creature and put this creature in this modern day setting. And that also becomes the fun part, trying to figure out where is the most appropriate place for this creature or monster to live and not get noticed. So would the aswang, who are, great at hunting down prey, and of course they need to smell the best, the freshest meat. And some aswang, of course, love to eat babies in the bellies of pregnant women. So I thought, okay, maybe they can be butchers. They now, the ones who live the clean life now run the best butcher shop in the wet market, in the palengke. So it's stuff like that where I play around, and yeah, I guess it needs to elicit a smile from me, and make me go, aha, that makes sense. So that's where we put this character. So yeah, it's a game. It's a game I play with myself just to keep myself entertained. And yeah, if I find it interesting, again, the hope and bet is that readers will find it interesting as well.
Do you have the monster in mind first before you put it in a new urbanized situation? Or is it a case where you need a particular monster for, you need something to fill up a purpose in the plot, and then you think of a monster to fit that?
More often than not, I would already know, or I've made the list. I think that's what I did, especially on the first year of Trese. I made a list of creatures that I wanted to feature in Trese. On occasion, like in one of the cases, we have a creature called the Oriol, and the Oriol is a sea demon, a serpent. And she follows your typical storyline of the way she lures her victims is that she is normally seen at a lake or a river, and at night, for some reason, I don't know why men are walking around that lake or river at night. Why are they there? We don't know. But then they would see her,
They're
this
drunk.
lady. Yes, they're drunk. They're taking a piss in the river. They would see the beautiful maiden taking a bath, and of course, stupid men would venture into the river, and then she turns into the sea serpent and then eats them, right? But one of the interesting things that I found out about the Oriol is that it also has the ability to breathe fire for some strange reason, even though it is a sea creature. So when I was writing that story, which actually is in the first book of Trese, all I knew was that I needed a fire elemental to become the main bad guy. So I wrote the entire story, and the placeholder was, and she encounters a fire demon at this stage who breathes fire. So
you'll figure out that later.
Yeah. It was that generic. Fire demon that breathes fire. And then, so once that was written, that's when I, started to do the research. And we, thankfully, University of the Philippines, came out with a series of books, which compiled a lot of our legends and myths and folklore. So there, I just spent the weekend going through it until finally I read about the Oriol, and I said, wow, okay, she's the perfect fit for the storyline. And that's how she ended up there.
So this is long overdue, but it is now 15 years after the debut of Trese. And this September, courtesy of Ablaze Publishing, you are finally getting an international release. So can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
Well, the short of it is that we got a call from Ablaze. They invited us, and we said yes. But yeah, we're that easy. But the long version of
it's not particularly helpful.
No, it doesn't. So let me tell the long story.
Yeah.
So it'll sound more dramatic that way. So 2018 was, as context, all these years we have been pitching Trese to US publishers. Maybe we didn't do it in the best way because we always got rejected. So 2018 was when we got the latest rejection letter. And that was when Kadjo said, hey, maybe I should redraw issue 1. I said, don't do that. Please don't redraw number 1 because we need to finish book 7 at that time. So he said, now let's redraw number 1 and put it on a crowdfunding platform, just so we can get, let's kickstart getting an international audience. It might be the best way. And he said, I've been doing research about it. So I looked into it, and that's what we did. Kadjo redrew the first case of Trese. We put it on Indiegogo and started to promote it as much as we could. And then by sheer stroke of luck, 2018 was the same time Netflix announces that Trese was going to be part of their anime lineup. So those two things happened at the same time, and we hit our targets for Indiegogo. We get featured in Newsarama, and then that's when we got the email from Ablaze. Ablaze is made up of editors from it's a brand new company, but the editors have been working in the comic book industry for decades, I think. And they showed us their lineup. They said, we have put together this lineup, and it is, as for those of you who've taken a look at what they've been coming out with, they are a mix of European graphic albums, manga, as well as manhwa. So it's all stories that the US, at least the North American market, has not seen, because it's the first time they're translating a lot of these stories into English. So they thought that, Trese would be a good addition to their lineup, and we thought the same. I mean, looking at the titles that they had at the time, especially what came out in their first year, we thought it would have been fantastic to be part of that lineup. We've taken the time to, of course, polish the first book of Trese. Because we've already done it for case 1, so we thought, why stop now? and that's why, so all the Ablaze edition will be brand new artwork.
That's a question I was going to ask, actually, soon after, because I was wondering what led to that decision, but now you've basically told me what it was. So thanks for preempting my question.
I always do. But yeah, I mean, it was, and again, for its time, I guess back in, when we first released Trese, I still feel that, we were able to capture properly the mood and tone of that Metro Manila that we wanted to portray. But yeah, I mean, Kadjo's art has, evolved through the years, and he feels more comfortable with this new style of his that he's been using. He used it for the Indiegogo one. He used it for the book 7 issue that we came out with last year. So it was only proper that he would redraw the entire first issue. We've also, but part of it is we've added more pages to the storyline. So again, now that we've been given the chance to redraw it, a lot of some scenes have been extended.
Interesting.
And now, and again, keeping in mind that we are primarily talking to an international audience, we have added bonus material which explains what is an aswang, what is a nuno, what is a tikbalang, and we did it in the form of, these are journal entries supposedly written by Alexandra's grandfather.
Okay.
So
that's great material. That's great supplementary material. Because everyone in the local audience just knows what that is, but it's something for the international audience.
And again, when we first wrote Trese, if you look at it, we never took the time to explain to you what these creatures are all about. Because again, back then, the assumption was that the audience you were talking to also grew up with the same stories we grew up with, right?
That was a safe
So
assumption back then. Yes.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but interestingly enough, through the years, thanks to Trese readers sharing their copies with friends abroad, we've received email from yeah, exactly, readers from all over the world who have expressed how much they love the stories, our stories. And I guess, thanks to Google, it is pretty much easy for them to do a quick search on what are these specific creatures. So I guess it hasn't been that hard for them to immerse themselves, and that just opens up the rabbit hole, of course, and that's why they said, oh, this led me to want to read up more about Philippine mythology. So I think that was a benefit of it, and or a great side effect of it. But we thought, yeah, let's add the back matter to make it more interesting for our new readers.
I wanted to talk to you about that because you wrote Trese in English to start with. And you've told me before it's just because you're more comfortable writing in English. That actually has helped you get that international type of recognition because it's easier to share with people who only can read English. But there is another version that you released a couple of years ago, a Tagalog version that was translated by Bob Ong. And I've got it right here. I've got two issues. There are apparently 3, but I've only ever seen 2. So,
okay.
And I've noticed you only released 3 and they're in color. So can I ask why you guys stopped at 3? Or
Because we needed to finish the Indiegogo version in book 7.
that's a good answer. Because it looks great in color, Budge.
Thank you.
Is that a thing that's going to happen with the international edition as well? Like,
It'll still be in black and white.
It'll still be in black and white.
Yeah. So it kind of fits into the whole. I mean, I guess in the scheme of things, for Ablaze, then you've got your full color graphic albums on one side, and then you've got all of the black and white manga, manhwa, and then of course the token Filipino comic book in that lineup. So it kind of fits. And we did the Filipino edition that you have because in I don't know, 2013 or something like that. It's such a nice date, 2013. Let's go over 2013.
It's 13 is Trese, Budge.
Yeah. Oh yeah. By the way, yes. To our foreign audience, Trese is the Filipino and Spanish word for 13. I got an invitation from, at that time, the Department of Education had put together a group of people to come up with a new list, a required reading list that would be placed in essentially textbooks, or they call it activity books, which would then be distributed to students around the Philippines. And thankfully one of the editors who was part of that council selected Trese. So they even included Pugad Baboy, the comic strip, works of Bob Ong. So they really wanted to update the reading list, and it's not just stuff from 1970s and back, right? Which is what we grew up with,
of course,
reading short stories written in the 50s, 60s, and that was it, right?
Why update educational material? Times don't change.
It needs to be historical.
They only change every 50 years.
Yeah. Exactly. These kids don't need to learn more. And they selected case number 5, which is the one with the duende, the dwarves. The story of the dwarves who are actually responsible for the showbiz career of certain people in the entertainment industry. So they selected that because I remember now, the nice thing what they did in the book was that they put it side by side. The students then would read a story written in I don't know what decade that was, but it was an old story about duendes. And then right after they read that story, then they read Trese. So then they get to compare. Here are the stories told by duendes back in the 60s, and here's a modern take on it. And of course, since it was supposed to be distributed for Philippine textbooks, they needed to translate it into Tagalog, into Filipino. So they had a translator do the job. They uploaded it online, so it's actually for free. So again, that the students don't have to spend or pay to get this workbook. But there is a print version that was made available for some schools. Anyway, point is that we started to get email from these students.
Oh, great.
So yeah, so it was the first time they read about. Of course, some of them were emailing us because it was their homework.
I remember this. You were getting emails from kids who wanted you to answer their questions.
It's like 20 questions long. And question number 1 was, "Sir, can you summarize the history of Philippine comics?" It's like, oh, I replied, "Here's google.com."
I do want to point out that my article, my 2011 article on the history of Philippine comics is the most read article on the Comics Cube, and you are cited heavily in it. So, you have done their work for them. They just have to find it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. At first I was nice and would send them links. Eventually there was just too many of them. And I would send them links. But so there, it was a mix of really frustrating email where they would send you 20, 30 questions about it. And I'd go, this is their assignment. These are the questions the teacher was asking them. And now they're asking me. To really heartfelt letters of and it just it breaks my heart, and it just makes my heart swell. And I must have received maybe I don't know, 5, 6 emails, and the emails would always go, "Dear Sir Budge and Kajo, I read your comic book when I was in grade school, high school. I read the books. I would read the books in the bookstore and open them up and read it in the bookstore because I couldn't afford them. But now that I have my first job, I have bought all of the books. I've bought my first entire collection of Trese. And every time I read that, it's just like, oh my God. It's like, it just makes me want, I will send you more." I just, it amazes me at how that one story in that textbook has affected them so much, which made me think, what can we do to reach that audience? What can we do to reach those students? And when I proposed this idea to both Kajo and to Nida, our publisher, Kajo was the one who said, "I want to do it in color. Let's offer readers. If you're an old-time reader, this would be something new for you. If you're a new reader, then let them experience Tressa in color for the first time." And then, of course, we were looking at who would be best to translate this. And of course, Bob Ong is one of the best, fantastic fiction writers that we've got in Filipino. And also, of course, part of Visprint. So I thought we invited Bob to, do you want to work with us and translate this? And thankfully he said yes. So yeah, I mean, it is something we want to continue doing because that is that's another batch of readers that I'd love to reach out to. So eventually, yes, somewhere in between the US edition, book 8, in the anime series, you will do the more of, so you can get book 3 and 4, Dewey.
Yeah, the language thing is a very complicated matter in the Philippines because not everybody speaks the same dialect of Filipino. Almost all schools teach English as a medium of instruction. So, in a way, writing it in English is actually the right move, but it's also maybe not the right move for some people. It's there's never a right answer to this. But speaking of all the books of Trese, there are in fact 7.
Aha.
And this is not even counting the supplementary material. Um, and you are only internationally releasing this one, Murder on Balete Drive. Balete Drive is a real street in the Philippines that is known for supernatural stuff. And you do set it very grounded. You change some names of certain corporations and everything. And you do have, first, I want to ask, is there a publishing schedule for these 7 books? When can, and if so, when would we be able to expect book 2 internationally?
No schedule yet for the other books. I guess yeah, we're focusing more on delivering book 1 for this year. So yeah, I think we'll get into that discussion in a couple of weeks, I hope. But yeah, I mean, we do want at least. For me, I think if we can get the first 3 books out, I guess like next year, book 2 and 3 for that matter. So, but yeah, still to be discussed. Nothing definite right now.
So maybe 2 a year, hopefully, like if things go well.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Now, as time goes by, and certain things happen in Trese, certain real people
I have no idea what you're talking about.
get
Yes. Yes.
certain characters have a resemblance to certain real people. Like, for example, there is a boxer who fights the forces of evil, and he looks very much like a particular Filipino boxer. And also there are other characters that are based on real people, and there's even one issue where it's based on an old Filipino myth of something that happens in a mall.
Oh yeah.
Is this something that you, for example, so that thing that happens in a mall, the myth is that there is a snake man that follows around the females in the fitting rooms, and then he kidnaps them. Is this something that you're also going to explain away in the back matter of future books, or?
Oh yeah. Well, definitely the plan is for to continue doing the journal entries for any creature or urban myth that appears in the book.
Okay.
Of course, now explained in the context of the comic book, right? So, like in book 1, we also explain, we talk about, where is Balete Drive? What is the typical story, urban legend heard from Balete Drive? And then, of course, we segue it into the lady in white that haunts that street, and trying to explain it in the context of Trese. So yeah, I mean, definitely will for that storyline of the urban legend of the snake man under the mall, then it'll be explained in that manner. And then yeah, as for like any real life person that resemble that resemble real life people are not real life people. I think yeah. I mean, the funny thing is that a lot of the personalities, and I guess I ended up writing those stories about those personalities because they have become legendary and mythical in their own way. They have,
That's true. Yeah.
there is a myth, a myth field surrounding these people. Their stories, the stories about them, the tall tales about them, are regarded as fact. more than than what you see of them in news and in newspapers. Um, you hear the whispers and how much people adore them, and how much they, to the point of worship, the way people look up at these people, and whether they are political personalities, celebrities, or like businessmen, the tycoons of the Philippines. There is a myth surrounding them, and you hear all of these side stories about them. And I guess that's what I grew up with. Again, in the same way I heard stories about the Snake Man, I heard stories about, oh, you know what this what this politician did? She did this, and she did so much good, or she did so much evil, or to a bridge was created in her hometown, and they sacrificed babies just to make sure that the foundation of the bridge would be strong. And that was coming from all over,
Yeah.
growing up. It's like, that person didn't talk to that person, but they heard the same story. So is it all true? So that's that myth that surrounds our, our personalities back home, that they are raised to mythic status. And I guess that just made it, story material, perfect story material. I mean, think about it. Sorry, and this just came to mind. One of our heroes or first presidents, Emilio Aguinaldo. I just read recently there has been written in textbooks. There is a belief that he had an agimat, a magic amulet that
Oh,
protected
I
him,
read about that recently. Yeah.
and that supposedly he was accompanied or protected by a capre, a giant, an invisible giant, and that's why he
To smoke cigars.
outlasted that smoked cigars, and that's why he had all of his enemies died, and like he survived the revolution, became president, lived a good life, and they're saying it was because of that. So not in the realm of science or anything like that, but it has become part of his storyline. So I guess it just felt natural to include these personalities in the Trese books.
It is interesting that you mentioned political personalities, because there is in the year 2020, especially when everything is in such unrest, there is an ongoing debate, both in general and also for some reason in your Trese Facebook group a lot. There's a group that basically keeps on wanting to say that comics and these kinds of stories shouldn't be political. You have actually political figures in your comic. So what's your take on this? Because it's really weird to me that this is even a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess to put it to context, as to all of the people watching this, it is interesting how even in the American market, right, in the U.S. comic book market, there is this sentiment of comics should not be political. And it's what Dewey is talking about is that most recently that came up in the Trese Facebook group, where that discussion came up, and of course the regular readers, or the ones who are more attuned to this, have started to show, well, yeah, but did you read the book, and didn't you see this story and that story, where I had portrayed certain characters to resemble or to be similar to known personalities in Philippine politics. So again, it's and I think I was talking to a friend of mine, and the way he was seeing it was that, oh, these people are offended because it goes against or because you are making a statement against their political belief. Had you shown their the people that they support and shown them in good light, then probably they'd be going, yeah, and they'd be hitting that like button, right? But of course, we're portraying corrupt government officials in a certain way, or that was the point of discussion, right? I think one of the things that got a lot of what do you call this, discussion and debate and and a lot of what do you call this, hate being spewed around was one artist. I had reposted. I was the one who reposted it. One artist had drawn Darna, our our favorite superhero, handcuffed and then labeled as a terrorist. And that is because there at that time the anti-terrorist bill was being passed
Debated,
or
yeah.
was being debated, and essentially that artist was trying to say, if this law comes to pass, then anyone who says anything anti-government will be labeled as a terrorist, right? And then, of course, the other artwork that got reposted was by Mervin Malonzo, and he had done what do you call this? A homage of that Captain America punching Hitler shot.
Yeah.
He had drawn Darna punching the president, right? And that got reposted into the Trese page. So there was all that discussion, and again, for me, it's like, it is, you can't help but especially when you are supposedly telling stories that are happening, today. You will delve into talking about the political atmosphere. And what I keep telling, and I've posted it several times, was a quote, and I don't know if I'm quoting him correctly. What do you call this? Oh, now I'm blanking. The writer of The West Wing is, oh my goodness.
You know what? I'm just gonna put a graphic under this that says who he is. Once I Google
Yes,
him. Like,
and I was about to say, yeah, he's my favorite writer, and now I'm blanking. So yeah, when he was writing The West Wing, he was saying was that he was writing. Of course, in that storyline, the Republicans were portrayed as, essentially the bad guys in a way. But for him, it was because that made for best. He wanted to show this democratic president, and it was because he felt that was how he could get the best stories out of it, right? It wasn't because he was, making a stand and saying, he wasn't using the TV show as a political stand. He was creating, at the end of the day, you are creating entertainment. You're creating an engaging storyline. So in the same way, I think that's how people should see comic books, right? And if you are offended, then you can stop reading that comic book. But for you to expect to pick up a comic book and not get hit by some kind of political statement, then yeah, I don't know what world you're living in.
even the absence of a political statement is a political, like the choice to not address something is a political statement in itself. So
Absolutely. So yes.
yeah, I've got a couple more questions before we wrap up. The first one is, you were rejected from several comic book publishers in the US, but Netflix did not reject you. You are getting a Netflix animated series next year. Is there a release date? I know you can't talk much about it. Is there a release date though? And what can you tell us about it?
Definitely the series is in the works. It's on production, in production. Thankfully, despite what's happening around the world, the studio working on it has been able to continue to work on it.
I have heard that animation is one of those things that did not get stopped by coronavirus because you can do it from home.
Yes, yeah. Thankfully. So yeah, and even like recording the voice actors have been, they've managed to find ways and means to make that happen. But yeah, to put it into context, getting Trese on screen has been almost a 8-year journey of getting rejected before Netflix came along. So the people responsible for it, and I can claim, I cannot claim being I have no fantastic story of like, yeah, I went into the studio of that big Hollywood exec and I pitched it, and it was like, no, I have no story to share like that. The ones who can share that story are two wonderful ladies, Tanya Yuson. Tanya Yuson approached me, read Trese 10 years ago. She read book
Mhm.
3 and somehow found a way to send a text message to me and said, would you be interested in having this adapted into a live action, movie or TV series? I met up with her later on. I met her partner, Shanti Harmain. Shanti is an Indonesian movie producer. And ever since then, they have been going around the world. They've been to the US, to Europe, to Japan, and obviously even Philippines, pitching Trese. And at that time, we were the big focus was, can this be made into a live action, something. And yeah, obviously things would like move forward, stop, and then eventually it'll fall apart or not happen. But I think it was 2017 or 18 when Netflix anime division said, we are opening up the doors and we'd love to do. The plan was to do anime that was not necessarily from Japan.
Mhm. Like
So they
anime
wanted,
style.
yes, an
Yeah.
anime style to create more animation series and movies that originated outside of Japan. So there, they found out about that. They pitched it to Netflix Anime and got approved. And soon after, they got Jay Oliva to come in as our showrunner and executive producer. Jay is also Filipino, based in LA.
Mhm.
And for the DC animated movies viewers out there, you would be familiar with his name as he's directed a lot of the Batman animated movies. And if you check out his IMDb, he is also the storyboard artist for movies like Man of Steel and Wonder Woman.
Mm.
Um, so that's the team essentially that they put together. Tanya and Shanti and now Jay are essentially the team that is heading the production of Trese, the animated series.
No release date yet.
No release date
No
yet.
release date yet. Okay.
Yeah, but I know. I guess it was funny that sorry.
But it is next year, right? Like that's still on the plan for next year, or
We're still waiting. Yeah, it's funny because if you take a look at Netflix now, it will say, if you look for Trese on your Netflix account, you will see it's supposed to come out this year.
this
Uh,
year. Oh,
well, again, if you look at the how
yeah.
it's classified, but we're still in production, so it's definitely not happening this year.
I mean, a lot of things aren't happening this year that were supposed to happen this year. So that's okay.
Yeah,
So
but I
yeah,
guess it was just funny that they announced it at that time, and a lot of the series they did announce in 2018 had already come out or came out soon after. So, but I think it was just a great opportunity to announce that Trese was going to be part of the lineup. And if you look back at that time, there was what was it? Was there? I think there was a Malaysian series, Malaysian produced anime coming out at the time, and as well as there was another one which was a Mexican or a Hispanic series called Sais Manos that also came out. So I think that it was just a chance to be for Netflix to show that they had a diverse set of stories coming out in the next couple of years.
it is kind of like in the middle of a sea change in terms of content, I think, because if you look at a lot of Netflix stuff right now, a lot of it is items from different countries. And I think it's become much easier to share stories internationally. So I don't think it's a matter of you really being rejected several times, so much as now happens to be the right
Mm,
time for it.
mm,
Your Facebook group at this point in time has over 7,000 members, and the group has really taken on a life of its own. There are some very strong meme lords over there. Did you ever think that Trese would have such an active fandom?
No, no, not at all. It's and as I keep saying, telling the group every now and again, or in the few times I've met them, I mean, I am just thankful that they're the ones who have kept the group alive, especially during those years when we in between book 6 and 7. So it's great how they've kept the discussions going. Of course, they're flooding it with their memes. Of course, there are people who take it, some people take it the wrong way, and some people get offended by it. And
Some people get offended by the cat posts.
too
I'm like,
many
are you guys offended by the cat posts?
cats and horses, right?
Yeah, cats and horses.
And dogs, and now dogs, because
Which the audience here will understand when they read
when
Trese.
they read the book, yes, why are there cat memes, horses, and dogs happening there? And also, I just wanted to point out, it is they have started to do their own fan fiction. They've started to do their own, and I guess because it takes us such a long time to come out with the next book, they've started to speculate what's going to happen next. So there are times when I go, oh my God, how did they figure that out? Or like, wow, I've never thought of that. So yeah, I mean, they are, it's, I love it that they are great storytellers. And now that I think about it, maybe I should encourage them and say that, I think as much as it's great that they are spending time and energy creating artwork and fan fiction, I would, really love for them to start creating their own stories in their own universes. And it would be fantastic to read that. But there has been, every now and again, someone would say, oh, can we compile all of the fan fiction into a book? So and I've had my fair share of putting together an anthology, and it's a headache. So yeah,
I remember Quintillion.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Doy. No, but yeah, I mean, it's I'd love to do it one of these days, but I think I think the readers would enjoy it more if we get to release book 8 first,
and also the international edition and all of that. And so this is my last question. The thing about that is you already have such an active fandom with all the fan fiction and the memes and everything, but this is just its infancy, because now you're going to be exposed to a wider audience. Is there, like, what do you hope that the international audience, or even the Filipino audience who doesn't actually read comics and will only see this on Netflix for the first time, and then for the international audience who will either see it on Netflix for the first time or see the international edition, like, what do you hope they take out of it?
I just hope that they enjoy it at the very least. That they find something familiar with it. Whether it is a love of detective stories or urban fantasy stories, that they find something familiar with it and that they keep coming back. And I do hope that if they do like it, that they would continue to share it, and that it would spread out more. And I guess that it becomes, and this is looking at how other readers have reacted to Trese, is that it has become a reason for them to read up more and explore our myth and folklore more. So if this is the first time that readers are discovering our, gods and monsters, then I hope it lets them want to read more about it. And we are at a time now. I mean, just before this call, I was checking out. I was looking at a group that is about to launch a D&D compatible manual called Sinauna, where they have all of the creatures and the characters and the classifications are based on, our myth and folklore. So, so that eventually, I think, in the same way, I think manga has opened up, the world to Japanese culture. Then I hope, that somehow Trese becomes the trigger or the jumping off point for learning more about our culture as well.
Great. So this has been great, Budge. Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, yeah, please pre-order now. Please pre-order now.
I'll place an Amazon link.
There you go. There you go.
Right here for you.
So yes, especially to the people outside of the Philippines, now I hope this makes it easier for you to get a copy of it. We've gotten the occasional email of how do I order, and then they find out shipping is more expensive than the book. So,
much more expensive than the book.
Yes. But there, so yes, please do check it out. Pre-order the book already, and that'll help our publisher determine. It just gets us to find out the reception for the book and how well it's going to be.
Right.
So yes, thanks Dewey again.
Thanks, Budge. Thanks for being the first guest on the Comics Cube on YouTube.
Yes. I hope I won't be the last guest.
No, I already have a few more lined up after you.
Oh, okay. So. That's great planning, kids.
I didn't line up too many, but I've got a few more lined up. So,
okay.
All right. Thanks, Budge.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, you can pre-order Trese Book 1, Murder on Balete Drive, from any of your local comic book shops or from Amazon.com. The link is below this video. And while you're at it, you may as well click on the red subscribe button so you're subscribed to future episodes of the Comics Cube.